Hello everyone and welcome back to the YellowDog 3D tips blog. Today I'm going to be showing you how we can make a weathered texture look or sort of worn edges. So I've just got this scene inside of Maya. It's just a wrench with a simple HDRI sky dome in there, and what we want to do is create a shader that's going to automatically find the edges of this wrench and put a different texture there. So to start things off, I'm just going to jump into the node editor and I'm just going to hit the tab key and drop in a layered shader. And this is just a really useful node. It's going to allow us to mix two different shaders together. So to keep the node graph nice and easy to understand, I'm just going to select the shader group and the material info and hit this little minus icon here, and that's just going to hide them from the node graph, so we're just left with the shader. So I now need to apply this shader to the wrench. So to do that, I can just middle mouse drag the shader from the node graph onto the wrench, and that's just going to apply it. And now we can begin building the rest of our shaders. So I'm going to build the base coat now, which is going to be sort of a red color. So I'm going to drop in an AI standard shader and just hit enter. And again, we're just going to hide the shader group and the material info from the node graph in the same way we did a minute ago. And I'm just going to go into the attributes of this and just call it red chrome, and we can set this up later. But for now, I'm just going to add another AI standard shader to the node graph, and this is going to be our scratched layer. So this is going to be the layer of sort of chipped paint that we want to be revealed by the curvature map. So I'm going to rename this one as well, and this one is just going to be called Bumpy Chrome, I guess. So now I'm going to begin attaching these to the layered shader. So all I need to do that is select the layered shader and middle mouse drag them into this work area. I'm going to delete the default green that comes with it by clicking that little X. So now it's just the red chrome shader that's being piped into the layered shader. And I'm going to start setting this up. So I've gone into the red chrome and I'm just going to create a red color. I'm going to turn the diffuse weight up a little bit and just add a little bit of specular. And to better see what we're doing, I'm going to go into the Arnold menu and open the Arnold Render view. And we can set up a nice little IPR here to get some look development going on. So if I just go to render and run IPR, we should get an image. I think I might need to click, yep, there we go. So that's basically what I wanted, to be honest. Like, I've very little setup, like you'd want to tweak these a little bit more. But I just wanted sort of a red chromy paint texture. So a little trick for working with the node editor for building textures is if you go to render and debug shading and put isolate selected on, it means that whatever texture you select in the node editor is going to be revealed in the IPR. And I'll show you what that means in a minute, but it's very, very useful for setting up textures like this. So next I'm going to put my bumpy chrome texture into the layered shader as well. So I'm just going to middle mouse drag that onto the work area, and you'll see that's piped in nicely. And I'm going to go and set up this bumpy chrome texture now. So you can see now, because I've selected that bumpy chrome in the node editor, it appears in the IPR, and that's what the debug setting does. So again, I've just had a little bit of specular to this. I want this to be really quite reflective, sort of just a metallic texture. And to sort of roughen it up a little bit, I'm going to add a simple bump map to it. So just in the bump map settings, I'm going to just add in a 2D texture, in fact maybe a 3D texture, and we'll put a Brownian in there, and I'm just going to up the bump depth a little bit. Let's see what effect that's having. It's not very apparent, but there is some bumping going on there. If I just disable that, oh, never mind. I'll just go to the isolate. Yeah, there we go. So using the debug view, we can see how that's going to be mapped onto the texture. So just going to the Brownian in the node map, I can see sort of the scale of it. So I can just tweak some of these settings because I think it looks a little bit large for what I want to do. So it looks as though this lassunarity field is controlling the scale. So that's looking quite good. It's quite a nice rough sort of chromy texture. And I'm not going to spend too long setting this up because I'm just demonstrating how the curvature map works here, really. So actually I think this material is a little bit too reflective, so I'm just going to turn the roughness up a little bit, because if it's scratched metal then it probably wouldn't be fully reflective. So I'm just going to leave that texture as it is now and move on to showing you how the curvature map is going to work. So all I need to do is hit tab in the node graph and add an AI Curvature. And again, I'm just going to hide the shader group and the material info just to make it less confusing. So the idea is to use this Arnold Curvature Map to control the transparency of one of these shaders. So I'm going to control the transparency of the red shader with the Curvature Map. So I've just middle mouse dragged that onto the transparency in the layered shader node. And if I go to the curvature map, you can see, because we've got our debug mode setting on in the IPR, you can see what effect that's having. So it's basically drawing an outline around the curves of the object that it's applied to. So we can use this as a mask basically. So the white areas are going to be transparent and the black areas are going to be opaque. And I'm just tweaking some of these settings in the Ai Curvature node just to show you what they do. This is basically going to be trial and error. It's going to be unique to the object which you are texturing. So this is looking quite good, but to make it look a little bit more organic, I'm going to add a noise texture in, and it's just going to be a noise texture node. And again, I'll just hide the nodes that we don't need, and I'm going to plug this noise texture into the curvature map to control the edges of it. So I'm going to middle mouse drag that onto the radius here, and that's just going to roughen up the edges and make them not look as sort of plain. So I'm just going to control this noise texture because it's far too large, and I'm just going to up the frequency sort of massively, and basically this is just going to make the edges look a bit more natural. Instead of them just fading off with a gradient, they're going to fade off with this noise texture now. So I guess this scales quite good. So if I look through this curvature map now, you can see that the edges have been roughened up by the noise texture. So again, I'm just looking through the curvature map and tweaking some of the sliders to sort of make the edges look how I want. And this is basically going to be, the white area is going to be where the chrome texture, the scratch texture is going to be, and the black areas is where the red texture is going to be. So just looking for a nice natural look to it. Again, it's just going to be unique to whatever object it is that you're texturing. So I guess this is looking quite good now. I'm quite happy with the way that's looking. So I'm just going to look through my layered shader now. So I've just selected my layer shader. Sorry, that was off screen so you couldn't see, but all I did was click the layered shader in the node graph. I'm going to turn the debug shading off, and we can see now that you've seen a little bit of that chrome shader shining through at the edges, but I want to make it a little bit more obvious. So I'm just going to tweak these sliders whilst looking through this view. So basically just tweaking these sliders until you get the look that you're after. I like to think of the spread slider as basically a contrast slider, so the higher this is, sort of the more focused the effect will be. The threshold slider is actually an angle sort of tolerance, so the lower it is, the more angles will be considered by the curvature map. Bias basically controls the fall off, and multiply adds some sort of boost to the overall effect. So it's quite intuitive and easy to understand. So I'm just going to lower this bias to lower the fall off, and that sort of pushed the effect towards the actual curves of the surface a bit more. So that's starting to look a lot more like what I was imagining. So you can see towards the edges, you can see that it looks like the paint has chipped off, and it's revealing that chrome texture underneath the red texture. And that's just because we're controlling the transparency of the red texture with the curvature map itself. So this is really starting to come along now. It's quite hard to tell because of the IPR is really noisy itself, but there is quite a lot of noise in this curvature map. So to sort of reduce that noise, I'm going to change the samples. So I'm going to double that to 6, and that should just sharpen up the details a little bit. And I think I can up this multiply a little bit, and maybe up the threshold, which is going to sort of control which angles are being considered. So I think quite a low number on this threshold works pretty well, and the spread, yeah, sort of I'll keep that quite high. So I think I'm ready to run out a render now and see what this looks like. So I'll just pause the video whilst I do that. So here is the final render. As you can see, it's all looking like we planned. You can see that noise texture coming through on the sides, and you see the metal, shiny metal coming through around the edges. So it was pretty quick and easy to set up. There was no UV mapping done. I did change a couple of settings though, and that's the spread. I upped to 1. I upped the threshold, lowered the bias, and increased the multiply quite massively, as you couldn't see the effect too clearly on the render. But there you have it. Once again, thank you for watching. This has been the YellowDog 3D Tips blog. Stay tuned for more 3D tips. Cheers.